this session on negotiating a South Asian identity. Now, we've had a very engrossing and tantalizingly brief session in the other hall earlier, which was supposed to be India, the cultural conundrum, but of course it became, as I had predicted, about the South Asian identity. And there were many questions, many worries, and of course many anxieties. I invited some people. I said, what we can do is, the speakers are different this time, but we are going to carry on pretty much the same discussion. Ms. Day and Shobha Day and Chaudhry Azizan also both reflected on this theme, and so we have much to talk about, very little time, and I'm going to quickly welcome, as the chair of the session, Shrabani Basu, who's actually come in from India, right, and has just kindly accepted to fill in for the panel, but she's uniquely poised to speak about such issues with her engagement with journalism and fiction. Moeed Yusuf, who is a Pakistani who lives a very peripatetic life between America, Washington, and Lahore, and he's actually been an author, an editor-author of a book called the South Asia 2060, which is with you. Unfortunately, it's not available in the stalls outside, if I'm not mistaken. It's actually an incredibly rich and very stimulating book about a compilation of multiple essays from the region on change, on history, on the future, very much on the future, and the challenges ahead. And to my right, I have K. Anis Ahmed from Bangladesh, because this is about South Asia, and this is a reminder that South Asia is not only dominated by the two nuclear powers, one status quo and the other called the revisionist past. So very quickly, we're going to go into some questions that I'm going to throw at the panelists, but before that, just go into a little bit about why we're doing this. Why we're doing this is because now this is not necessarily a view anyone has to share, but I think our daily politics with, say, ourselves and increasingly, in my view, a remote state, an aggressive state in South Asia, but increasingly remote in terms of delivering anything, and certainly not the kind of state that is nurturing or welfare-oriented to its citizens, which is very clearly the need for South Asia. I'm not sure an aggressive economic policy within a state, a supply-side economic policy, would cause great impact in each country. And I think we can't divorce ourselves from the context of speaking about our countries, because really that is the sum. South Asia is actually the sum of its parts, but I have to agree with Moeed very quickly that these are false choices, development and otherwise. Before I go to the Bangladeshi participant, please feel free, Anis, to just negotiate this interjection as you like. Please feel free to speak about Bangladesh and its relationship with Pakistan. It's been a trauma-filled relationship. How is it going for the future? And obviously the navigations that Bangladesh has made over the years with India and within of itself, and the new success stories that you can think of.
Sure. Thank you. I'm invited here as a literary author, but in my other life I was trained or studied as an economics student and continue to be an entrepreneur and publisher. So I'll speak in both capacities because I think it's an issue where we authors are often expected to take the cultural view of things and talk about how our cultural affinities should bring us together. But based on mainly my experience in my other capacities, I think that there is a little bit of a false romance in that. If culture were sufficient, then a lot else would go easily. What we need is to, we talk about this South Asian unity as an a priori that it is desirable without understanding or explaining first why it is desirable and why it would be desirable. It's the reverse of the chicken and egg problem. It is desirable because ultimately it will lead to a level of prosperity across the region that this shelled-off existence doesn't allow. And at the same time, that economic incentive needs to be identified both as a means and as a goal. Like, if we can see that that's what's going to happen and we start believing in it, then we can make the move. What happens here is one of the unique problems of South Asia, in my view, is that we have an odd imbalance of powers. And you have the European Union, you have ASEAN, which are more roughly equal powers. And we've actually entered a time in global history, the last especially 10, 15 years, where after a push towards multilateralism, there has been a decline in multilateralism. You know, WTO has been ineffective for the longest time, and other mechanisms for multilateralism has also been on decline. The more powerful countries have all been pushing for bilateral solutions. So we see a distillation of that phenomenon in our own region, with India pushing for separate bilateral deals, with India being the biggest power in the region, with each of these countries with more or less degrees of friendliness and success or lack of it. In this situation, given India's sort of unique, outsized place in the region, I think there does need to be a special initiative from India, and so each of us, our countries, Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, needs to overcome certain, I think, blocks that we have, mental blocks. In case of India, on the one hand, it is, you know, aspiring to become a superpower, and some Indians are convinced that they are. But on the other hand, when you look at India's interaction, say, with a much smaller neighbor like Bangladesh, I find that India's approach is very defensive and not in keeping with this superpower aspiration. At the same time, Bangladesh, being the smaller country, is also defensive. India wants from us transshipment so that they can have direct and easy access to their northeastern states. And we are very nervous about giving that transshipment. We want from them, less trade barriers. Speaking of culture, Bangladeshi books, Bangladeshi TV shows can't find their way even into West Bengal freely, whereas Indian shows in Hindi, Bengali, everything is pumped into Bangladesh and creating a kind of cultural asymmetry that does not help this vaunted affinity that we want to base everything on. So there are things to be given on all sides. The relationship with Pakistan for us is, of course, much more fraught and has to do with the history of 71. And I know that it's a very touchy subject here, as it is an emotionally charged one in my own country. And with the recent war crimes trials going on there, it's newly come into the news, and the viewpoint we have in Bangladesh, which I'm sure is not necessarily going to be agreeable to everyone in the audience, is that it was an incident of immense enormity, and we can't move forward. We feel we cannot move forward without coming to terms with it in some form or manner. And many of the other similar war events, genocides, atrocities that happen around the world has usually had, it's not a pretty term, victor's justice, starting with Nuremberg trials, but in other situations too. The comparison with Bangladesh has been inapt, because in the case of South Africa, in the case of Cambodia, you've actually had the entire support of the world on the side of the victims. 42 years after war, Bangladesh is still not in that situation, and we kind of have a brave government and a very feisty population trying to eke out what justice they can at this, usually justice delayed is justice denied. In this case, it's not denied, it's partial, and people are making the best of it they can. So in this context, when we say that we would like friendlier relations with Pakistan, to be honest, I don't know to what extent that is going to be easy until from both sides we find some measure of reconcilement on the past. You know, I come across people who tell me, oh, it's the past, forget it. First of all, I don't know that anyone anywhere ought to forget the past. Secondly, we need to move on, and the focus does need to be on the future, but it is hard to do that if something important in the past has been left completely unaddressed. So that's sort of where Bangladesh is vis-a-vis these countries. We have a lot to ask of Pakistan. I personally think we should move forward, having taken some stock of the past, and forge bonds and trades where it can be fruitful to both countries. Same with India. But I think economic incentives need to be identified. Infrastructure, the building of infrastructure, the opening of infrastructure, be it literal roads or information highways, opening all that up will actually lead to a convergence at a conceptual and values level, which will make these psychologies of distrust diminish over time. And then you get into a virtuous cycle where we've been in a non-virtuous one so far. And not to make light of a serious topic, if we're in a giving mood and giving each other what we want from the Bangladesh side, we could really use a couple of pace bowlers from you guys.
Shrabani, I don't want to put you in a position where you're in an adversarial situation, but I think here's we end up without meaning to defend nationalist positions, but it's very useful also for audiences and groups of people to exchange their ideas. And so, Bangladesh's relationship with Pakistan, its relationship with India, with each other, how we overshadow the region, and also addressing very quickly water conflicts that exist between all three and can spark new wars, and because that is one unresolved issue even with Bangladesh. So if you could speak to that, and then we can open it up to an interactive, maybe more truths can be told before there's reconciliation. So,
thank you, Sherry, and thank you all for all your insights. I thought I'd come into this actually from start with a very personal viewpoint, because unlike all your authors who didn't have a South Asian identity, and Sherry, you think it's gone, I'm actually totally South Asian, and that's because that's my identity. I was born in Calcutta, I'm a Bengali, and as soon as I was born, soon after my birth, my father was posted, so we went to Dhaka, so I lived in Dhaka, and then he got posted to Kathmandu, so I went to another South Asian state, and I spent my childhood literally hopping from one South Asian country to another. So there's a little bit of every country in me. We never went to Sri Lanka, that's the only one sort of got left out. And afterwards, after living in Delhi for several years, I then moved to London, where I live now, and the entire South Asia is in London. That's the melting pot. So I have so many more. I had a few Pakistani friends, but more and more, I have many more Pakistani friends, many more Bangladeshi friends, and the Nepali friends, etc. They all continue. So for me, it's a personal journey. I mean, I feel totally South Asian, but that's one thing. And of course, as a journalist, one is writing about all the conflicts which are there. But my other hat is as a historian and a biographer. So I live in history. And you say don't forget history, but my books have always been pre-47. So I have lived in a united, all my books have been about a united state. So they've never been borders. My last book, I was just doing the session on Victoria and Abdul. And for that, I went between Pakistan, the family is in Karachi, the other half is in India. And Queen Victoria was sitting there in Windsor Castle, and this three-way thing is going on. And everything just naturally and seamlessly flowed. I mean, of course, it's not an ideal situation. This is way beyond. But for me, this South Asian identity, I don't even think about it. It's just natural. And what I find is that, obviously, on a people-to-people, I mean, we are here in this literature festival, and it's seamless, absolutely seamless. It's only, obviously, when we are debating the harder issues that it all comes in. But having now lived in London for a while, I mean, I'm looking at this from the outside, and I look at Europe. I did one book on the Second World War, and my next book is on the First World War, and it's about the Indian soldiers and the Pakistani soldiers, who were all Indian soldiers then, again, no borders, who all went and fought together, and these beautiful stories that they wrote together from the trenches is what I'm going to write about. But Europe went through two of the most divisive wars that mankind can think of. I mean, we are talking about our wars, 71 and others. Nothing compared to World War I, World War II, on the scale that happened. And yet, they went beyond all this. They brought down the later Cold War, they brought down the Berlin Wall. They have the EU. I mean, for me, I see this 2060, you're thinking, I mean, we have to sit here literally and think way ahead. I mean, this is obviously for the greater powers, we are just very small fry. But, if they could do it after these devastating wars and then get together, so the way forward is the EU way. It's trade, it's economics, and that's what's going to bring these people together. Ultimately, I can discuss literature, and the Bengalis will, then it becomes a language thing. The Bengalis, Bangladeshis, and the West Bengal love the Punjabi, Delhi and Lahore will blend, somebody else will blend with, some of the literature. Then it's a language, Tamil and Sri Lanka will blend. All that becomes about language issues, regional issues. The trade, The economy, that's going to get everybody together. You're going to get level slightly, development issues. Does the farmer in Muzaffarpur who's committing suicide care, he's drinking his pesticides, his crops are failing. What South Asian identity? You've got to develop those, make their markers more, get them together. And, visas, we have to have, I don't know if there'll ever be a day where, they have the euro. Would we ever have one currency? Just think of the trade. It's there. Why should we not think, way beyond, like 2060, think right ahead. And this could then be a superpower. Just think about it. Cricket teams, Bollywood, cricket teams, dances, culture, literature, it would explode. And of course, then there would be responsibilities. Germany took on. EU is also a mishmash of the poor countries, the rich countries. Germany took on for the EU, bailed out Greece, bailed out, paid the bill. Yes, the superpowers will have to bail them out. They're not superpowers, they're aspiring superpowers, they're nowhere there. But, the richer countries, India, etc., will have to bail them out. And if they want to play a big role, like Germany is doing in the EU, they better get their act together. They better get everybody together and everybody think ahead.
A lot to think about the coal and steel union that the EU was basically formed. It wasn't a huge economic driver. And again, Germany and France drove the coal and steel union that led to the formal structures of the European Union and how they see themselves as global citizens now, or cosmopolitan identity. We're very far from that, extremely far. Diasporas can think that way, but we remain, we circle back to square one, sometimes -1 between India and Pakistan. And until that conflict is resolved, we will continue to overshadow all aspirations for a broader South Asian future. In 2060, China and South Asia, we would be missing the Asian century if, as a region, we did not integrate our economies. So we are, ladies and gentlemen, very far from that. The good news, though, is people talk about the first item on any menu of considerations as friends, not conflict-ridden nations or nations that are war. That is the travel barrier. The travel barrier is actually pivoted on visa regimes. And I want to take this opportunity to inform this House, I couldn't in the last one, that actually India and Pakistan are now giving out, as per the last few years' agreements, a 1-year and 2-year multiple entry visa. Now look at India and Pakistan. They don't want to inform their populace of this. Does anyone know? I go on a visit to Delhi for running Track 2 initiatives, which we run all the time. And there the students are running up to me, because I'm still ambassador at that point, but serving in Washington. What have I got to do with visas here? Can we get visas? I said, beta, they are available. The Indian visa is available online. I then went on into South Block and I spoke to an old friend, Shiv Shankar Menon, who's NSA, and he said, yes, of course, the agreement exists. And we're all operating it. I knew because my contemporary colleague Salman Bashir was in the embassy, Pakistan embassy there. He said, we're giving out visas. He said, people don't know about this. So people need to know that now visas are available online and a demand has to be created. Democracy allows us to create demand for change, and the demand has to be created. The SARC visa that we have, that I used to use as a parliamentarian, exists out there. It's gone from a 5-year multiple entry, which we opened with, to 1 year, but it's right there, and it is going to open up for businessmen. It should then therefore open up for media. And it is the future of foreign policy is everywhere in the world, now lying with societies. What that means is that people like us, you, ourselves, can leverage that change, but you have to mobilize to leverage that change and to make yourself heard. So I'm going to ask for questions from the floor for any of our panelists. We have a little bit of time left, otherwise I have a lot of questions. And would you please identify yourself very quickly and ask a question from specific panelists or to everybody? Are there mics available? Yours was the first hand to go up, so please.
Thank you. My name is Yusuf. This is a question for all of the panelists. Anyone could take it. I was just wondering, we've talked about history and how we can't afford to forget that and have to consider that while moving on. There's also this element of how our history is sort of based on factual inaccuracy, and there's so much disagreement about the collective history of India, Pakistan, Bangladesh. I've never read two books that could completely agree on any one account. And it's confusing. It makes making a decision or making an informed opinion hard. So how can we start to address that and maybe use that as a foundation for moving forward?
That's a great question. I have a potential answer, but I'm going to need to give the panelists. Who would like to address? Which one of you would like to address the textbook that's in my mind for South Asia? Who would like to speak to this? No one?
Look, I think there are two things here. First of all, the issue is not textbooks. Textbooks is a result of something else. And what it's a result of is that South Asian nations are guilty of basing their nationalism, the narrative about nationalism, on anti-other mindsets, right? Pakistan, India, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, I mean, the kind of discussions we're having. Once you decide that your nationalism is going to be based on this, then textbooks will flow from that, and many other things that we go through flow from that. So I think you first have to solve the real problem and then move to the textbook. The only other thing I'll mention here is that be careful not to want perfection out of this. You know, there's always this sense that I keep hearing that, oh, our history is twisted, it should be this. There is no accurate history here. Nationalism is an artificial concept, so you can pick up any countries. But textbooks tend to change after you've decided as a nation that you want to move beyond your old narrative. That has to come before the textbook.
Thank you for that, Moeed. I think we are certainly looking to change our textbooks in Pakistan. That's at least what I hear. And there's a young student there who wants to speak. I think this is the age of the young person, and the future of South Asia lies with all of you, not us.
Not
So
that
go ahead.
I'm a practicing barrister.
Well, you certainly have managed yourself, maintained yourself well.
Thank you very much for that. There are two observations and a comment that I'd like to make. Firstly, there is there's misinformation being directed from the flow, which is slightly amazing when it's being compared to other bigger organizations such as the EU, which forms its history out of losing a battle rather than out of winning one. So that is what got them together. Here in the Indian subcontinent, no one has a nationalistic identity to begin with. And because of lack of national identity, we do not know how to adopt a bigger identity as a result. The questions that the entire panel were concentrating on stemmed from 47, whereas if you go back to the time of the Mughal Empire, try to sort out the problems that came into the Indian subcontinent as a result of the elite coming in to rule, the British appointing feudal lords, which still continue to rule. As a result, the average man, be it in India, Pakistan or Bangladesh, never got to express himself as his own identity, and as a result were never able to converge towards going towards a single goal because they're still divided into knowing who they are.
Okay. I think it's a little, that question is really, I think, addressed to Shrabani, and I think we should speak to that.
It was a question about identity. If the British came, there was an identity. They divided that identity. I think there was definitely a pan-Indian identity at that time. Nobody had it otherwise.
That stemmed the two-nation theory.
Yeah, they divided.
If you could let the panelists address this, please. Thank you.
I mean, they divided it. They formed. That's why we are what we are, and that's why we're squabbling, because, blame it on them to start with, and then we have our own faults. But, no, and they did not, when you say they didn't use the war, they were fighting each other there in Europe. I mean, there was a huge war that they had. There were national identities for each one, the Germans, the French, the English, but they all had to dissolve all these and come together because of economics. And I think that is what will finally drive, because that is what will drive South Asian countries together. It will finally, it's usually about the money, and I think that's what it's going to be finally.
It is. Actually, and I think that the whole business of contested identities will continue. The identities are not fixed. They're negotiable, they're navigational. And I think one of the issues is the rise of nationalisms in our countries, in some of our countries. Certainly India and Pakistan has seen a very huge defining of the self with the other, and so the constant otherizing of another national identity has created barriers to the kind of regional utopia we're looking at. But utopias are very important as a goalpost. If societies don't have plans and visions and dreams, then they don't move forward very quickly. Is that Imtiaz? Oh God, Imtiaz, I've grown so old I can't see you. You're shining pate. There you go.
I think we are not ready to learn from our lessons, because we have been the killers and murderers of the people of Bengal, East Bengal. And it is in our self-ignorance not to learn that lesson, because we can't see in our face as murderers in the mirror of history. The issue here is directing of Bangladesh and Pakistan. That you are unhappy with us, and we should remain unhappy with us, so that you could forget your Muslimness and assert your Bengaliness. And we are unhappy with you because you broke our Muslimness so that we could become Pakistanis or something else. What do you say about it?
Huge question, how religion is navigated today in Bangladesh.
My question is precisely how we were happy that, okay, finally you built up, established Bangladesh, not on the basis of Muslim separatism, which is still haunting us and pushing us close to Taliban and their kind of Sharia. But you built up your nationalism on the basis of language and nationality and ethnicity and national deprivation and colonization. And your national liberation was entirely focused on that. And you gave the first secular constitution, which is revived by your courts, thankfully. But how are you again? It is again emerging the big movements of Islamists. So this is the issue with the whole Muslim world, where we want to find our roots, at the same time we want to undo the roots to remain Muslim, a part of Ummah which doesn't exist anywhere else.
The essential paradox, and I'm letting Imtiaz have a long intervention because he really should have been on this panel. Just to introduce you to who he is, he's been the person asking the question or making the intervention, has stood behind one of the largest non-government movements, if you like, in integrating South Asia. He set up almost single-handedly an institution called SAFMA, which we all have been part of. Good luck to you, Imtiaz, if you would like to.
Sure. First of all, I would like to begin by saying that as a Bangladeshi who's now come to Pakistan for the first time, and this is only my third day here, I actually have a strange connection to Lahore. My father went to college here in the 1960s. He was here from 1959 to 71. And he was actually a Bengali officer in the Pakistan Army, who then in 71 went on to become a prisoner of war here. He spent 3 years in different camps. And I was separated from my parents because of the war. I grew up without them for the first few years of my life. So at an individual level, I would say that I've grown up with a very dichotomous vision of Pakistan, because on the one hand, I was reared on these stories from my father about the beautiful Lahore of the 60s, his time in Gymkhana Club and that sort of thing, and at the same time, this very harsh and brutal history of what happened in 71, and also the discriminations that led to that conflict. And on the one hand, I had a longing to come and see my father's, part of my father's history. And on the other hand, I really, felt a certain kind of psychological wariness about coming here. And what eased me into, feeling comfortable about coming here was really, again, people-to-people contact, meeting Pakistani writers in other literary festivals and them inviting me to come here. So I've come here and I'm, thoroughly charmed by Lahore. It is beautiful, as my father said it was. Even before I came here, even though I'm aware of my history, I can tell you this much. The overwhelming majority of people in Bangladesh do not see Pakistanis as killers. We do not see you as a people on the whole as killers or murderers, and certainly not people who were born after 71 or had no role in the events of 71. We do see the Pakistani state as having committed a crime in 71. We see the responsibility of that belonging to generals and politicians who made that decision in 71. And as a Bangladeshi, when I talk to, now I have Pakistani friends, when I talk to them and they feel the same way, I say, the sad thing about Pakistan not, in a sense, acknowledging that history and the state's responsibility in it, is that it has, in a sense, kept this entire population and subsequent generations implicated in the moral legacy of 71 unnecessarily. By assigning the blame where it properly belongs, you too could become free and move on. And you would help us move on, because this feeling of, we also feel that you're not acknowledging something that does get in the way of friendship when there is a hurt in place. So I did want to address that. We do not see you as killers. We do mind the pace of your bowling, but otherwise, for the most part, we don't have a lot of complaints against you. But we do want 71 addressed properly, and I think it's possible to do. The other thing is about Bangladesh and its identity. This kind of goes back to the question from the audience. Identities are always multiple and they're fluid. So it's not, when we say that we can have a South Asian identity, it is not one that will necessarily replace the nationalistic identity. I mean, we will have the World Cup football soon, and I will actually be in Italy when it happens. And I'm sure when Italy and Germany are playing, we will get some ferocious displays of nationalism by the Italians in whatever bar I'm sitting there. So, that national identity and cultural pride and sense of history, all that will live, all that will abide. And it's not an either or. Just because I have a pride in my Bengali identity, I don't have to deny myself a larger belonging to South Asia. People in Bangladesh who feel that they're Muslim and the identity of being a Muslim and whatever it means to them individually, whatever they derive from it in terms of a sense of values, mission, whatever it is, as long as it is in harmony with the overall purposes of state and society and not destructive, I don't see why it is something that also needs to be disowned or condemned. It too can be part of that identity. And that is how most Bangladeshis actually see it. We don't see it as either you're Bengali or you're Muslim or Bengali versus Muslim. Most 90% of our people are Muslim, and 99% of them are believing, practicing Muslims, and that doesn't stop them also at the same time from being very proud Bengalis.
Do you want a quick 2 fingers or 1 minute before we round up? We're at our end. It's been a really exciting session and actually quite poignant for many of us who have lived past 1971. I'm very grateful for the organizers and everybody here in making this lively and also allowing us festivals like this which tell many truths before the reconciliation can happen, before we move to the South Asian identity. So thank you very much, and thank you MTR. Thank you.
On behalf of the Board of Governors and the Advisory Committee of LLF, I want to thank Rehman for moderating this session. It's tremendous to have her. Thank you to KNE Ahmed, thank you to Shrabani Basu, thank you to Moeed Yusuf, and most of all, thank you to Lahore for this wonderful second annual LLF.